So I am going to go over a couple things, and one of the things I'm going to go over will hopefully be really helpful in getting ready to do your informative planner. So if you're looking back over the last couple announcements that I've posted, you can see that the thing that's coming due is the informative thesis and outline planner. And it is right here. Um, yeah, the informative thesis and outline planner assignment that is due on Sunday, October 18th. If you're following along with our schedule, you can see that this week is basically dedicated to the planner. So you can see basically here we are today. Just our only task is to continue working on the thesis and outline planner, which will be due on Sunday. And then you can see in week 8, just as a note, I'm reminding folks that we will not have class on the 20th and 21st, which shouldn't affect you guys. Is that right? Is that Wednesday, Thursday, or Tuesday, Wednesday? I have to look at an actual calendar. But just as a reminder that we do have reading days those days. So not just this class, but any class you have that falls on the 20th or the 21st, you won't be having class because it's a reading day, which is just a chance for you guys to kind of catch up on anything you need to catch up on without having to actually go to class. So during those times, I will probably be online anyway. So your other teachers may or may not be, but it is supposed to be kind of a time where you can reach out to your teachers, check in, get work done that you need to work on. So you can see that this week it's also going to be pretty light in terms of what we're doing, mostly just studying up for the quiz that then will be due on the following Tuesday. So in week 9, you have a quiz on Tuesday and you'll be submitting the paper here. So this should give you a fair amount of time to start working on your paper this week as well. All right, so here we go. If you look under week 7, part 1, planning the informative paper, this little section, I included what was due, a reminder to read over the details to make sure you understand what you're doing. Here I have the thesis and outline planner worksheet for you to download, and I just reminded everybody that one way to come up with these APA headings that are in the worksheet is to think about answering the questions that you already asked. And I'm going to walk through doing that in a minute with my own planner. Just a reminder of what you're doing, what your purpose is, who your audience is, what your tone should be, what your overall purpose is. Oh, that should probably say goal. I have your purpose twice. And then here are some resources. So these were a bunch of articles that I pulled that I thought were really good examples of how you can write informationally without it necessarily being boring, and also how you can write informationally about topics that are timely and controversial and important. Except for this one, which is just about Halloween, which is silly. Okay. So one of the things that I included in today's announcement is a PowerPoint about thesis statements. So this can be, it's linked here in the announcement. It can also be found in the instructional materials for Unit 2. And this is just a PowerPoint going over thesis statements. One of the things you'll have to do is write a thesis statement. So here I just explain, I feel like this is review for the most part. Here I point out the difference between an implied and an explicit thesis. Just noticing a typo. Isn't that always the way? I'm going to go ahead and download this, fix it. I made this morning. An implied and explicit thesis. An implied and a thesis is when you kind of have to pull the meaning out of a piece from all of the clues. And an explicit thesis is when you have a statement that's actually written that tells the reader the entire point. So in academic writing, in formal writing, you're pretty much always going to have an explicit thesis. Your teachers are always going to be looking for a single sentence that explains, here is the whole point. An example of a time when you might deal with an implied thesis would be in something like fiction. When you sit down to read a fiction story, rarely is there a sentence that says, oh, by the way, this story is, all about the themes of money and capitalism in the way it impacts social relationships in the 20th century. You're not going to get a lot of that. You're just going to read through something like The Great Gatsby and get impressions of the different themes that are throughout the novel through the images and the ideas and the dialogue that's put forward. So that's an example of an explicit thesis. I mean, an implied thesis. An explicit thesis is one where you have a sentence that's like, okay, here's what I feel about the topic. That's what you guys are going to be aiming for. So here under informative thesis, this is the kind of thesis you're going to be writing for the informative paper. The type of thesis you might be more used to is an argumentative thesis. An argumentative thesis is where you provide an opinion on the topic. So to construct it, you might provide the topic plus one or more of the following: your proposed solution, your explanation of why the topic matters, your belief about the topic, the side that you've chosen on the topic. That's all argumentative thesis. We tend to write by default. This is the kind of thesis we've been taught to write. This is usually what we think when we hear the term thesis. It is possible to write an informative thesis as well, and that's what we're going to be doing in this paper. An informative paper requires an informative thesis, which just includes the information that the author wants an audience to know about. Often, the informative thesis is a quick summary of the different parts of the paper. So this slide, I think, might be helpful to you guys because it shows how you might write an informative thesis for a paper with an example. So if my topic is uniforms in school, obviously an argumentative thesis would be something like uniforms in school are a bad idea. Uniforms in school are a great idea. Uniforms in school are a good idea because they contribute to lowered behavioral issues and less bullying due to personal appearance. All of these things are argumentative statements. What I'm going to be doing with an informative thesis, and if I'm just trying to inform people about this topic of uniforms in school, let's say I'm going to cover in my paper a section on uniform policies currently in place, some of the benefits of uniforms, some of the controversies surrounding uniform policies. If I'm going to cover those three things and just give my readers a general overview of like, okay, here are the places that have uniforms. Here are some of the rules of uniforms. Here's some information about uniforms. And then I'm going to tell you what some people consider to be the benefits and what some people consider to have, or some of the things that people take issue with. I'm just giving an overview of the whole subject. So what I'm going to do for my thesis statement is combine all three of those things. And here's my thesis statement. Many schools already have uniform policies in place because there are some proven benefits to having mandatory uniforms, although many students and parents have reservations about mandating uniforms in school. That's an informative thesis. You can see that here I explain many schools already have uniform policies in place. I'm summarizing this section because there are some proven benefits to having mandatory uniforms, okay? Benefits of uniforms. Although many students and parents have reservations about mandating uniforms in school. That's just another way to explain that there's some controversy around this subject. I'm going in order. When you look at my paper, my actual structure of my paper, I'm probably going to cover those exact three sections in that order. So in this sense, the informative thesis is summarizing all the things I'm going to tell about, all the things I'm going to talk about. And it also provides a map of the order in which I'm going to talk about those things. That's why it's probably advisable to figure out what those subheadings or sections or the content of your paper is first, so that it's easy to make your thesis after. So that's a piece of advice I have for you guys. And if you need to look back at this PowerPoint, it is saved in the instructional materials for Unit 2. So in addition to looking through that PowerPoint more in detail, the other thing that I ask you guys to do is make sure you look at this sample if you haven't yet. So here is a sample of the paper. And you can see now what I've done. I have the title. Here's my thesis. The bans on plastic bags will cause major impacts on consumer culture, on the economic sector, and on the environment. Notice I haven't said yet whether I think that they're good or bad, whether or not bans on plastic bags should be necessary or not, whether they're terrible or wonderful, because right now I'm just informing people what they are and what impacts people say they could have. I may include some people's controversial statements or some feelings that people have that are really strong, but I'm not yet coming down on a side where I'm explaining exactly what I feel on the topic, because what I'm doing is I'm providing information. So you may have a topic that is universally discussing something that's terrible. That doesn't mean that you need to stay neutral and pretend that something terrible, according to all sources, isn't terrible. You are certainly allowed to do that, but you want to present the information about why it's terrible first before you kind of get into the argument about what we might need to do about it, or how we need to solve it, or why it happened. Well, actually, why it happened might belong in an informational paper. But the point is, you're not coming out with a clear argument about the topic that's based in your opinion yet. You are relaying the information so the reader knows what's out there. So here, my first APA heading is going to be effects of plastic bag bans on consumer culture. My second APA heading is going to be impacts of plastic bag bans on the economy. And my third is environmental results of plastic bag bans. So those are the three sections I'm going to have. And then here, you can see major impacts on consumer culture, economic sector, environment. You can see that my thesis statement is made up of a collection of the topics I'm going to cover in order. Under this heading, the effects of plastic bag bans on consumer culture and supporting points, I'm just going to offer some points that I want to make about this topic, the things that I want to include in this section. Here under sources I will use, I just have little short citations explaining of the sources that I found, the 4 sources that I have, which of them will belong in the section, which of these will support this idea. And that's it. I didn't do it for these two because hopefully this example will show what you're supposed to do. If you look here, this is the actual worksheet that I want you to fill out. So here's the worksheet in all of its glory, worth 50 points. I'm going to go ahead and download it. And I'm going to show you how I would, maybe I'm going to download it. There we go. How I would kind of use the work I've already done on the planner, the literature review planner, the literature review paper and the planner to get myself in a place to maybe start thinking about how to break this into sections. So one of the places that you may want to start, and you don't have to, but you can, this is just if you're having trouble getting started. One of the things I'm going to try is I'm going to go look at my literature review planner from back in the day. Go back and look at my sample planner. Okay, what do I got? My dress codes. So if we look, I have these 3 questions. Are there dress codes in place in most colleges? Are those dress codes actually enforced? What are the reasons? Those are the 3 questions I set out to answer. I said in my literature review, here are the things that I need to answer. Here are the things that I think are worth investigating. I have 3 of them. I've done research to answer them. If you look at the setup of your paper, there are 3 headings. So maybe what I should consider is thinking about turning those questions into sections of my paper, because ostensibly I've done research to answer those questions. The first one is, are there dress codes in place in most colleges? So I'm going to turn that question, because you don't want to leave it as a question. I'm going to turn that question into a section. I'm trying to think of the best way to phrase it. even just call it dress codes in higher education. For my supporting points, here I'm going to think about what I'm actually going to put in this section. And I think I'm going to say include So already, if I look at this, I have a whole lot of topics to talk about in this section. Each one of these sections is going to be a couple paragraphs. So maybe when I'm looking at it, what I'm going to end up doing is maybe I will talk about, maybe I'll write a paragraph about each of these. I mean, that's 4 paragraphs already. Maybe I will write a paragraph about why some HBCUs have dress codes. Maybe I will write a paragraph about why some business schools have required dress codes. And in these, maybe I'll include some examples of different HBCUs that do. Maybe I will explain, maybe I'll quote a couple of the policies that they include. Perhaps I will have in another paragraph, a third paragraph, explaining why some religious schools with examples have dress codes and why some community colleges have chosen to have dress codes, and give some examples of community colleges that have. So maybe this section, and again, you might find that one of the sections of your paper is longer than the other, and that's totally fine. I think maybe the other thing I'll include here is, maybe I'll include this first, is a basic overview of the dress codes / what they include. Okay. My second question was, are these dress codes actually enforced? Now I realize, looking at my other question, maybe I'll save the explanation of why for down here for my third APA heading. Because my third APA question was, what are the reasons behind having a dress code? So here I'll put reasons for dress. As I'm looking at it, and this is what the revision process should be like, I think to myself, you know what, maybe the reasons makes more logical sense to come after. And so here I'm going to put enforcement of dress codes. Okay, so then I have my dress codes in higher education. And let's say my sources, I'll say I have 2 sources about this topic. I found, because at this point you should have found 4 sources. So let's say my Johnson 2019 source talks about this. I'm making these all up. 2017 source talks about it. Those 3 sources all discuss information I want to include in here. Reasons for dress codes. And then in this section, I might go into reasons that there are dress codes, reasons for dress codes. And again, I want to get my whole topic in here, in higher So here I might give a breakdown in a single paragraph. So I'll probably switch this around now that I think about it. I'll probably do 2 paragraphs in this section. One will give a basic overview of the dress codes, what they might include, and one paragraph will explain the different types of places that already seem to have these. Then when I get into reasons for dress codes in higher education, I'll have a section explaining in some schools it's a function of the religious purpose of the school. So there's a modesty clause, which makes sense. And maybe I'll write 2 or 3 paragraphs about the professional aspect, about wanting to seem professional from things like business schools, community colleges, and some HBCUs cite that as a reason as to why they have dress codes as well. So maybe I'll write 2 paragraphs about the reasons that these various institutions have dress codes on the books as professional. Sources I will use. So let's say I'm going to use, and again, I can use one source in multiple places. Some sections I may have 2 or 3 sources. Some sections I may have 1 or 2. You don't need to get every single source into every single section, but you do want to have a source in pretty much every paragraph, at least one source in every paragraph. So this is a way of planning to see if you're just using one source in this section and this section and this section, that's going to be a problem because you're going to be relying too heavily on one source. You want a nice range of sources. In this section on enforcement of dress codes, here I'm going to talk about what happens with dress code violations. Or I'll say give some examples of what happens with dress code violations. And this might also be a really good section to talk about a little bit of the controversies of pushback from students who don't think the codes should be included or enforced, and maybe some of their reasons. So maybe that's a paragraph. And in this case, I am going to use, I don't know. So if you look over it, I've got a couple different sources. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I probably got too many. I don't need that many. You don't need that many. So we'll just do, maybe we'll change one of these to, it doesn't matter because mine are all fake and made up anyway. But you can see what I'm doing here is I'm going through and I'm explaining that these different sections are going to have sources to include in them. And that sets you up to know where to put this information. And when you guys go to write yours out, this is all you need to write. You just need to write down the authors. If you have multiple authors, it would look like this. If you have multiple, if you have 3 authors, it would look like that. So you're just going to include where you're going to put these sources in your paper as a plan. And that's it. What I'm including here are just some plans of what I would like to talk about. And you can see that the way that I came up with these subheadings that I'm going to talk about is I pulled them from my actual paper. You can revise these if you're, I pulled these from my actual literature review planner from the questions. I converted the questions I asked into sections of a paper. If you found something new that you want to talk about, that's totally fine. If it works best for your topic and your brain to do something like dress codes in higher education, almost split your paper into a pros cons situation. That's certainly something you can do if it works with your topic. If your topic is something that there's a lot of discussion on different sides about it, you can certainly cover it by explaining, okay, well, here's why. If you think about it, you can think about it like looking something up in like Statista, I think is the name of the site. Or it might also be maybe in ProQuest, where they have the pros and the cons, the articles organized by here's what this side says, here's what this side says. If it makes sense to your brain and for your topic to do it like that, that's also completely fine. Basically, what you're trying to do is you're trying to come up with 3 general sections of your paper to divide your paper and make it a little more manageable to impart information about your topic to your audience. And then your informative thesis, you smush them all together. So if I had changed this section to controversies around dress codes in higher education, if I'm going to stick with that, my thesis statement would look something like this. Dress codes are sometimes present in higher education for a variety of reasons depending on the institution, though they can cause controversy. Boom. Dress codes in higher education. If I color code it, you can even see. This is kind of ooh, that's not visible. And you can see how all of these things are represented in order. And the first thing I did, you notice that I left the thesis blank until I had written these things, because this thesis then becomes an explanation of the things I'm going to cover, the information I'm going to go over, and it's a roadmap for the reader for understanding what they're going to get a general idea of from this paper. So that's pretty much, and then the title, I'm going to come up with something that includes the topic. So I could go very basic and just name it dress codes in higher education. I could be cutesy. I could ask a question. Because since this is an informational paper, somebody might be seeking out my paper just to understand if there actually are dress codes in higher education. Now they're merely sort of basic educational one, but that goes into a little bit more in depth that I'm sort of going to be discussing the pros and the cons. So those are some examples. That's pretty much it. The thing to remember about the informative paper is that you want to keep a nice, even sort of approach, and you want to present lots of information. That doesn't mean that you can't, if your topic is personal, if your topic is emotional, those ideas can certainly come through. Just wait to put forward your actual argument about what we need to do about it, or what needs to be, basically, yeah, like what needs to be done about it, because that's what we're going to tackle in the argument paper. In the information paper, you're just giving a report on what it is right now. What's the state of things right now? What's going on? What's up? What would a person need to know as a general background in order to understand? So if you yourself have been reading about things or hearing about things that you're not even sure what they are, and you've done a quick Wikipedia search or looked for an article just explaining the basics, that is what you're writing. If you read an article that starts talking about why something is bad and you've thought, hold up, I don't know what this is. I don't know that term. I don't know that idea. And you went and looked at another article, another entry, another source that told you what it was and gave you background. That's what we're writing right now, the informative paper. And that's pretty much it. So I'll ask you, any questions? That makes sense for the most part?
Sounds good.
Cool. All right. That's pretty much all I have. I am going to stop recording.